Most of the initial setup for Twilight Struggle is predetermined. However, both sides have a pile of forces, a pile of influence that they can throw into Europe. In the Soviet case, into Eastern Europe, in the US case, into Western Europe. The Soviets had to set up first, and they have to take their turn first in the action rounds. And I looked over my cards. Now, I have the Europe scoring card, which I will have to play this turn. I also have a couple of cards that I don't really like here, but I have the Formosa Resolution, which I kind of like the idea of playing before China takes effect. In particular, I believe it cannot have effect before the China card takes play. So I can use this right off the bat. That's kind of nice. The 5-year plan, this is kind of a disturbing card because it makes me throw a card away. But the card that I throw away is taken at random. I don't know whether or not the Europe scoring card can be included in that. Obviously, it would have to be shuffled in, but if it's drawn, it is a dual player card. So if that's a way to burn the Europe scoring, that may be appealing because my other cards don't really have much to do with Europe. This one I want to hold till late in my turn because it forces me to play with my hand face up. This one's appealing and a reason why I didn't put forces into Romania. This one I probably will not use for its event. I'll probably use it for the 3 points because 3 cards. See, here's the problem. This removes a 1-point card, pro-Russian card from the game. This removes a 3-point pro-Russian card from the game. I don't want to do that. You don't want to play events that'll be removed from the game that decrease your deck, essentially. I'm getting funny little splashes as though it thinks it's got a face here somewhere. I had to turn back on face recognition. Indo-Pakistani War, this is something that's appealing to me, and I may actually play to support my military forces for that. And then, of course, I've got the Fidel card, which I, again, may not want to play as an event here. I don't really want to discard this from my hand, from the game. It's a 2-point card. It's one thing to throw a 1-point card out of the game, but throwing, the more valuable events out of the game by playing them as events is kind of iffy. But Cuba is very interesting. The thing is, Central America doesn't get scored in this deck, so we can let it sit and stew there. So what we kind of did was went for our battleground states because they're important, thinking, well, we have more battleground states, we don't have more total states. We don't know what the Americans are going to do. They have the UK. We actually assumed that they would match us in both. But we actually are in a position where we might be able to get to that domination score if we fight for Western Europe. So now, after we see where the U.S. played, spreading out not in West Germany, for example, and the reason for that has to do with their own cards. They have de Gaulle leads France, so they didn't want to be in France because they'll lose influence there if they played there, and they are counting on having to play that. Warsaw Pact form, which they probably do want to play soon. The danger of that is it creates a lot of Russian influence, which could actually, if the Russians have the Europe scoring card, allow them to capitalize on it for an early game boost or maybe even win. For the win, though, well, that's pretty much impossible. Control all battleground countries in the region. It means France, West Germany, and East Germany. Those aren't going to fall very easily. So it's not going to be an auto win, but I don't want to hand them 7 points. Well, 4, because I'll have a presence presumably, for that. The blockade, which requires I either discard a 3-point card, which I'd rather not do, or eliminate all U.S. influence in West Germany. Well, so I didn't set up in West Germany. The hell with that. But that's putting a risk in play here again. I've got this kind of, I've got kind of ugly things in my hand going on here. For later in the turn, well, maybe NATO will get formed. Unlikely. And if that happens, I'll get to score some victory points off the special relationship. This also is a later one, which allows me to throw into some East European country. Now this is Yugoslavia, Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary. They're in Bulgaria. So I want to do this after the Warsaw Pact form, which could cause problems. We've got Vietnam revolts, which is not pleasant at all. That'll direct Soviet influence into Southeast Asia. But I probably won't be getting rid of that. East European unrest. This is kind of cool. I've got to decide which way I want to do this. What's neat about it is I can pull some USSR influence out of 3 countries in East Europe, which would reduce their ability to score there. But alternatively, it gives me 3 influence markers that I can play. Anyway, that's just some thinking before I actually make my decisions as to why I placed where I did. For the U.S. player, they're withdrawing from France and West Germany in particular because those are countries where, although they're battleground states and they kind of want to have them, they don't really feel like they have cards that they want to discard before that. Ooh, Canada's part of Europe too. Whereas with the Russians, they were playing towards the, I kind of don't want to lose points on this card, but now they're seeing some opportunities available. That's all I wanted to really say. I don't know where the headline card's going to go. I was a little disturbed about the facing on the counters, and I was correct in being disturbed. What I said earlier was incorrect. When they're face up, that's indicating that you have control of the region, rather than simply influence, which is the face down. There's no real need to worry too much about established versus unestablished, since things become established at the end of the current card play. Anyway, I opened things up with the Russians, throwing 2 points quickly into Greece. That puts them in a position where they are now tied for total number of areas, and they're of course ahead in battleground areas. So they're getting close to being able to play that card for good value. That's something the U.S. is going to have to worry about, and we'll see them respond. I just wanted to jump in about my rules statement. Now, the Formosa resolution cannot be played because the China card hasn't been released yet. So I'm able to dodge that bullet, essentially, by getting rid of it out of my hand before I start throwing before I successfully throw points into the Chinese Civil War. But the Greece move seems like, okay, well, we got a kind of interesting situation. Let me just kick off what we've done so far. After the Russians, what did the U.S. do? The U.S. threw de Gaulle into France, not as an event, but to throw 3 points down, which they put into the Benelux countries. They weren't in France. That puts a Soviet marker in France, but it also throws the de Gaulle leads France, which means NATO won't work in France anymore. That's fine. The Russians responded with the Romanian abdication played as an event. That threw them into Romania. And we're seeing this big fight over Western Europe. Well, or over Europe. At this point, the U.S. is about to throw their coup. They're playing a 4-point card. Now, part of me kind of wants to say, hey, let's throw it into Greece, where we can get, a fairly good chance of taking control. But honestly, I'm using up my 4-point card. I want to throw it in a battleground state. So where? Well, I'm going to do it in East Germany. Another option would be to do it in France, but the cost of putting pieces in France is still low right now. So, what I do is I roll, a single die plus 4, and I have to top 6 to have any effect. I did not. I broke even. So I didn't get an advantage out of it, and this means I don't use up this useful card that maybe the Russians will trigger over on their turn. Pushes us over to here. The other important thing is I've fulfilled my requirement, and because I've dropped that. And now the Russians can't coup in Europe anymore. So now since then, the Russians played de-Stalinization, threw some points into the China card. Using it for ops points, they don't trigger the event. The US played this for an ops point, put it into Iran, which was kind of threatening. Because you see, the India-Pakistan war is in Russia's hands, and they're looking at, oh, they just hit right next to one of my targets. So what they did instead was targeted an invasion of India by Pakistan, which means that on a 4 through 6, they had a chance of winning. They also got 2 of their 4 points that they need to regard. They did not get the victory. They had a 50-50 chance of victory. They would have had, it's modified -1 for every opponent-controlled country adjacent to the target. By picking India, they made it safe, but they couldn't get much of an advantage. They could get the 2 victory points, which is nice, but they wouldn't get any influence because the enemy didn't have any influence in either of them. Maybe not the best use of a war, but it helps them cook some of those points away from a coup. And now the U.S. is going to try to shoot the Warsaw Pact into space. It's a sufficient card on a 1 through 3. They succeed, whoops, that shouldn't still be there. They succeed in dumping themselves up to be the first satellite up there. And they do not. They had an early failure, but they use up the card so they can't go again. And that should put us to about here. Crapola. I realize I forgot to do the headline events at the beginning of this sucker. I think I'll start over, but I'll load this up as one of my many blooper reels. I think there's some interest in it still, but you don't get to see the playthrough that follows from it. You do get to see a little bit of thinking on their first turn, but I'm just realizing, wow, I had one too many card left at this point.